Good morning, dear friends, and welcome to the third and final day of the 11th Russian Internet Governance Forum. The forum, for the very first time, was held in May 2010. It happened on the day when the .rf was delegated, and it took place here at the very location where we are right now, at the Moscow Expo Center. Very well, today we have a pretty intensive agenda. This year's forum started with a youth internet governance forum, and we are going to conclude this forum with yet another discussion and a session with the younger generation of people interested in internet governance. But right now we begin with the first session of the day, which is called Attributing Cyberattacks on the Internet Myth Busting. Well, in a couple of words, why did we decide that this is a relevant topic? And if you remember, we mentioned that at the opening of the forum in recent years. Indeed, we have seen an unprecedented number of publications about the attacks that are allegedly organized by Russian, Chinese, North Korean, Iranian, and other hackers. They interfere in the operation of government agencies, institutions, companies, and critical infrastructure around the world. And very often these accusations only refer to the IP addresses or the VPN gateways that these hackers use in a certain language, Russian or French or whatever. So today we've assembled a panel of experts of cybersecurity, and we would like them to discuss this very important topic. Is it possible at all to have attribution of cyber attacks? Definitive attribution. So today with us we have Alexey Lukatsky with Cisco, and next to him is Sergey Golovanov. Yeah, that's right, and Sergey Golovanov, leading cybersecurity specialist with Kaspersky Labs. And next to him is Igor Zalevsky, the head of Cyber Incidents Center with Rostelecom Solar. And we also have two online speakers. One of them is Alexander Kalinin, head of the Center of 24-hour incident response with Group IB. Hello, Alexander. And Liz Vihul, founder and general director of Cyberlaw International Law Firm. Good morning, Liz. So we'll pass the floor to our moderator, Alexey, over to you, and I'll remind all the listeners, all the participants who are watching the broadcast, that it's possible to send your questions to the panelists using the chat. Yes, good morning, colleagues. Let's begin with a quick introductory presentation. We want to set the stage for the subsequent discussion. Only yesterday, or was it the day before, President Biden of the United States said that he received evidence that the attack on SolarWinds at the end of last year and subsequent attacks on Microsoft Exchange servers around the world were perpetrated by Russian hackers. No evidence was shared with the public, but the American administration still intends to introduce sanctions against individuals who, in their opinion, were implicated in these attacks. So today we will talk about attribution. Attribution is identification of persons organizing and performing attacks. We want to discuss whether any government officials have any right to claim that they managed to identify or attribute the cybercriminals, hackers, government, non-government hackers or groups. Technically, is the internet today ready to offer a more or less trustworthy attribution of actions online for the benefit or against some governments or states? So we will try to not to not speak without any evidence. Instead, we've gathered, like I said, a panel of real experts who have a lot of practical experience of fighting those attacks. So let's begin with the promised slides. Let's take a look at the picture, which is often cited when this or that government accuses another government or a government organization organizing attacks against the government. So if you replace the government with another word like an enterprise or a company, the picture will look pretty much the same. This is how it usually happens. So allegedly from a territory of a particular country, from the IP addresses that were allocated to a particular telecom operator, which is an organization registered, say, in Russia or in China or somewhere in Western Europe or in South or in North America. Usually this is seen as one of the reasons or grounds for one state to accuse another state in organizing cyber attacks. We understand that today the internet allows us to rent virtual machines and servers anywhere in the world, in any country, and as a result, the actual picture may look quite different. And the attack may seem to be proceeding from one state where the last server is located, which was in the chain of activities, and this country, which hosts the server, is then accused in cybercrime. And it is, we will understand that it is also possible to organize some framing of another state. And so if somebody wants to accuse another state, or set up another state, frame another state, this can also be organized. So let's try to shed some light on this rather controversial topic. Is accurate attribution at all possible? What is attribution, in fact? And in the physical world, what is attribution? Is it any different from the attribution in the virtual world? In the physical world, we collect evidence first, and then we try the accused person, then the court decides whether the evidence suffices and is accurate and complete so that the accusation can be upheld in court. In every crime leaves some traces, and those traces can be used to identify the abuser or a perpetrator, a person or a group associated or not associated with a government. It could be government itself, it could be an individual who decided to launch an attack. So attribution allows us to give the answer to the question, who is behind the attack? And attribution as a multidisciplinary subject matter, which includes all kinds of disciplines and competencies, not only technical but legal as well, and geopolitical and linguistic competencies are also required for a proper attribution. So attribution is not guesswork. It's not a situation when some government official decides to make a statement and claim that this is the person, or this is a group, or this is the government that is behind a certain crime. Perfect attribution should give us evidence that an incident is caused by a particular entity, an individual, say, or a person. But for us to make that conclusion, we need to be able to capture that person, that entity, preferably in flagrante delicto. We need to seize the assets that were used to perpetrate the crime. We need to collect the evidence, like I said, and only after that we'll be able to claim that this is indeed the person who organized the attack. If we can also find proof that this person was commissioned by the state or is hired by the state organization or a hacker group, perhaps, then we will make another step forward, and then we'll be able to claim that, yes, indeed, there is some special service that is ordering this crime. But usually this never happens, and in every country has the domestic legislation. Sometimes the countries unite and they organize international cooperation to capture those criminals. But in the majority of cases, this process ends with identifying the node on which some abuse is identified without identifying the actual person behind it, or sometimes the process ends at identifying a user or an electronic address or a group or some hacker team that was taking the action. And maybe it was an action against some commercial enterprise or an industrial company or a government facility. So when we talk about attribution, it's important to understand that attribution varies and it depends on many different circumstances. In real life, in order to charge somebody with a crime, we must have evidence. In the virtual world, very often a claim suffices. When some statement is made against a person or against a group of people, usually those claims, those statements are pronounced at government levels, because very often people who investigate cyber crimes, they are a bit more prosaic. This is not, you can't have instantaneous attribution. I mean, but what it really happens is often there is attack in the morning, and in the evening there is already some claim or a charge or an accusation. We experts will know that we can't arrive at a conclusion like this that fast. We need to perform a whole host of various activities, linguistic expertise, technical, forensic studies, in order to be able to identify the actual criminal. So, to finalize this presentation, how can we identify the criminal? Well, we need to find traces first, and these traces come in all kinds of shapes and sizes. Well, we can, of course, start with IP addresses, but IP address is not all of the evidence that we need. It's not enough just to have information about IP addresses. We know that IP addresses can be impersonated or replaced, or an IP address can be registered in any country of the world, and it can be indeed the node that will be used in an attack, but it will have nothing to do with the original nationality of the person organizing the attack. Also, in various reports, forensic reports, or in various public statements, you read that the attack was registered at the time when it is working hours in Moscow, for instance. The attack was registered in particular time zone when people were at work at that time. But we know that apart from Moscow, there are other countries in the same time zone, and Russia is not just Moscow. Russia has 9 time zones over its territory. So just to refer to a time zone and to think that criminals work during the business hours is a bit of a fantasy. So to rely just on the time zone or the timestamps or a timestamp associated or in connection with an IP address, again, this is not enough evidence. We also need to analyze the code. We need to analyze the comments that people leave in the code. We need to study the signature of the coders. We need to use the stylometrics, analyzing the style of the code or the artifacts that are left at the virtual site of crime. Then we must also analyze the activity in darknet, in the forums, and the social media. Often people who committed crimes will boast about it, or indirectly you'll be able to make the relevant conclusions. And then all of this needs to, the whole process needs to finish in operational surveillance and other law enforcement activities, possibly. So only after all of these steps are taken, we can have more or less accurate attribution, or we may make an attempt at attributing the attack to a particular person or entity. So like we have already announced, we have a lot of panelists today, and we want to start with Alexander Kalinin from Group IB. Very often, Group IB manages to identify criminals, and they speak about it in their reports. They would usually not state the name of the particular criminal or the state to which the criminal belongs. Probably they do it like that because they understand that just by that means they cannot complete the investigation, that their investigation is still more technical than a complete criminal investigation. Well, yeah, if you can hear me, yes, indeed, attribution is quite a sensitive topic. If you cannot be 100% sure, then it's better if you refrain from publishing your findings in the public. Of course, we share our findings with the, say, Interpol or Europol, and those authorities will then complete the investigations, and then it will be up to them to decide what information to make public and which information to keep classified. There were several hacker groups or cybercriminal groups that we encountered in our practice in the last a couple of years. Last year we published a big report on UltraRank. We analyzed samples of existing malware, and we analyzed recent cases of infecting various sites. So we managed to identify just sniffers from one large group. We published this report last August. What they do is they steal banking details of people who make purchases online. So if you want to buy a cinema ticket, or you are buying goods online, you enter the number of your credit card online. You have been always using it, but next time you do it, it will turn out that the website was hacked, and the perpetrators will be able to steal your banking data. The geography of the operation is quite wide. This group, over the period of 5 years, changed their structure several times. They modified themselves, they reinvented themselves, and that's why different analysts at different points in time believed them to be different groups. And here you can see the names that they used or that were attributed to them. They have 3 types of GS sniffers. They are written here in green: fake logistics, web rank, and sniff life, and they used to infect various online stores, e-commerce sites. In attribution, the important thing is that attribution should be verifiable. Is if one investigator claims to have identified a criminal, then the evidence should be presented so that it can be audited by others. This is the concept that we stick to, and we believe that this is the same group because they were using a dynamic IP address, but they were using more or less the same location of the servers. They also had several stores where they kept their databases, and they also organized several supply chain attacks against the same targets. They were using GF sniffers that a certain family of GF sniffers inside the same campaign. The branded agency was infected. Last year, they were using CMS Magenta, which is pretty well known, and one of the attributes was top-level static.com. I hope you can see the slides. I hope you can see the screenshots. Well, if you're sitting far from the screen, I understand the font is tiny and probably you can't read it very well. Anyway, then there was Block & Company. They were also using Magenta, and a malicious code was injected into their website, and it was very similar to the malicious code that was injected into the branded agency. It was written slightly differently. There were just minor differences between these two codes, and that difference was injected there for a reason, for a purpose of making parsing more difficult. And there was another site, AgriLine, the French information agency, that was also attacked in 2019. So we could connect these codes or these attacks together through the similarities in code. All the infections that we identified, we managed to trace the activity of this ultra-rank group back to 2015, to their very first campaigns. As we were investigating AgriLine, we found another domain name that was registered by the same person or on the same server, and we also found that they were using well-known websites that are used that always used by other criminals. We decided to call it WebRank2. We called them. We found logistics and TW, and 1 out of 33 of these domains that were linked between each other that were also registered by RISC-IQ. They were used to attack e-commerce sites in 2015. We found samples of this JavaScript code, and these scripts are virtually identical to what was used in the WebRun family codes. Here you can see the similar features. They are not 100% identical, again, but they are similar enough. Another thing is domain names and the names of the files that they used. It was a reference to JavaScript framework that never existed, 1.9.2. This version never was released, and nobody else used this this code. Besides, these hackers there were other signatures that they left in the code. So once again, we had three different investigations, three different types of code that we were investigating, and not just us, other people as well. But nobody before us made an association between these three different hackers. Then we found this Valley CC card shop. These guys were boasting about their accomplishments, and they were sometimes boasting that they are paying out $20,000-$30,000 every day to other people who are stealing card data. Card shop appeared not long before the start of the first campaign that we managed to tie to it. Ultra ranks campaigns also had a lot of enemies. Actually, recently we saw that the criminals are very happy to publish data about other criminals, and they are using phishing websites that were mimicking the Valley CC card shop. So this connection between the shop and the infrastructure from which these guys DDoSed the sites the valid CC construct. So again, the DDoS attacks were also attributed to the same infrastructure. So all these micro connections are shown on the slide. It's very difficult to keep all of this information in your head. But as you put it on paper, basically, if you make a chart out of it, it becomes very visual and clear. On this side, you can see the different techniques that we used or the different signatures that they left on one more slide, and I'm almost done. This is what we face every day, phishing websites. We find them, we block them, and we also started displaying the attribution. It turned out that it was not easy. It's very difficult to do this with machine learning algorithms, almost impossible. To the left, you can see several websites from the same criminal group. But on the graphs, all kinds of graphs, it's a ball of thread that you can't unwind. So again, we base ourselves on our conclusions on the signatures, on the code, HTML, hosting, registrations. Alexei has said that registration itself is not enough evidence, but it can be a complementary factor in attribution. Graph analysis that collects everything that is known about that website and that humans can miss out. The graphs can make everything and all very visual, and then various addresses. For instance, we are using that information as well. Again, this is not enough evidence. People sell names and addresses. Very often, criminals use very standard email addresses to which they send stolen data. Not all criminals are smart, you see, and because they are not very smart, it's sometimes difficult to connect those criminals with a particular group. So individually, all these items taken individually, they mean little, but when you bring all of this together, you'll be able to attribute an attack to a particular entity. That's it. So on the technical side, this is how it is done. I don't want to talk about the legal aspects of it yet. We also have to apologize to the translators because it's very difficult, perhaps, for them when the speaker mixes the Russian and the English words. Now I want to ask our next panelist from the Kaspersky labs. What is the experience of your lab? Sergey Golovanov, Fast Flags, other groups. Who have you investigated? Yeah, sure. Can we have the slides, please? Yeah, I prepared the slides. And in my presentation, I wanted to also talk about facts. Like you were saying in the beginning, there is an incident, and we start with a case, with an example of an incident. A financial organization is hacked, and the ATMs start shedding money, basically throwing out money. So let's say that this is our incident. Many things happen online, but let's say that this is our fictitious incident. There is this kitchen somewhere, and a person sitting there and presses a key on the keyboard. So the signal goes to the is processed on the computer, then the signal is transmitted online, then the signal reaches a chain of servers. After that, the signal is received by a computer in a bank. After that, and the signal is transferred to the ATM, and only after that, the ATM gives out the money to a person. So somewhere someone presses a key on the keyboard on the computer, and somewhere else the ATM gives out the money. The first this first part, the blue line, is the actual attribution. The response management teams and the banks, they respond to everything that happened and at the bottom of this slides. Then there are special people, security people who investigate the servers that are used to maintain anonymity, and then forensics and criminal experts will be able to find that device on which the keyboard was placed. And once we have all these pieces of the puzzle together, so it means you need to have at least 3 people who independently of each other have to build a whole chain, identify the whole chain, and only after we have all these elements, we'll be able to say that we managed to attribute the attack. You know that after attribution, a prosecution should follow. So if we did indeed collect all the elements, if all our experts made their conclusions and the we have all of the reports, then we should go to court. Well, this is not attribution. Putin personally managed hacker attacks during the US elections. This is not attribution. Is this how it looked like? Of course not. Definitely not. It can't look like this. Attribution using source code. There is this idea that a code, a program, is a sequence of ones and zeros. WannaCry that hit the whole planet. Lazarus, the attack was attributed to Lazarus. This was done using zeros and ones. FF20, FF25, FF25, they were the same. People used the ones and zeros. And in court, this kind of attribution, the 0-1 attribution, can be easily verified. It says 1 here, and it says 1 here. Here is 5, and there is 5. Any judge will be able to see with their own eyes that indeed the numbers match. When attribution is performed using the traces that you mentioned in your presentation, it can be a setup, and the biggest setup that would confuse any expert is the attack that was performed during the Olympic Games in South Korea. There was a code, the Olympic Destroyer, that interrupted the broadcast. For specialists, it's a real circus. There were people enjoyed the Olympic Destroyer. There were so many different versions and opinions. No, these are the North Koreans. No, the Chinese. No, the Russians. No, the Americans. And the company that provided the broadcast, they didn't know what to do while people were having fun trying to analyze the Olympic Destroyer. This Olympic Destroyer, it was an amazing case indeed. And another one that is usually attributed to the Russians is NotPetya, and there is this logic that it was never used publicly, and you can see that here we have a similarity. One of the reasons why some claim that Olympic Destroyer can be attributed to Russia is that it used the same special commands that were embedded in NotPetya. So just like in our case with the ATM, in those cases, and these are the takeaways, the attribution is a process that should involve a lot of experts. There should be specialists, there should be experts, there should be witnesses, and of course all these people have the right to have their own opinion. They have the right to pronounce their opinion. They can say that well, in my personal opinion, the attack should be attributed to such and such entity. You can't stop people from speaking their mind. So when people analyze malicious code, they have the right to speak their mind. And one expert will believe one thing, the other thing. Attribution has nothing to do with such a situation. Attribution is when all experts agree and when all their opinions coincide and they point at the same entity. If there is no artifact of the incident, if there is no evidence, there are no witnesses of the incident, then if there is no specific data, then there is no incident, basically. The specialists should not guess. They should work with evidence or traces. The experts do not have the right to guess. They should work with data, and only after all evidence converges, then the judge will be able to pass the decision. And the expert study should be performed in accordance with the methodology. There can't be the second, the third, the fourth opinion. The methodology should be reproducible. That is to say, if one expert followed the methodology and arrived at a particular conclusion, then any other expert following the same methodology should be able to arrive at the same conclusion. Not the third, not the fourth, not any else conclusion, but only after that people can be sent to jail. And only after that we'll be able to say that this is attribution and not some private opinion. Right, thank you very much, Sergey. In two presentations, we heard some ideas that I would like to put forward to Liz Vihol. Both speakers said that we must have evidence, and evidence must be verifiable. Experts should be able to verify it, to audit the evidence. Cybercrime can be local, that is to say, it can happen within one country, or cybercrime can be transnational, transboundary, and fall within the jurisdiction of Europol or Interpol. And this is also a proper investigation. But very often there are geopolitical accusations. Many people say it's attribution, but it's not attribution, like Sergey said. It can be just a private opinion, or even if it is pronounced by a government official. Another important idea is that if we want to accuse somebody of committing a crime, then we must bring that person to court. Only courts have the right to confirm that someone indeed committed a crime. Others can accuse, others can press charges. If there is an accusation, then evidence should be provided, and it's only up to a court. I mean, if we want to avoid also the situation when the accusation will prove to be wrong. Again, all of these cases, all these accusations must be settled in court. So what is the legal aspect of attribution, Liz? And after you have spoken, we will have a general discussion. Please, over to you, Liz.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. Before I start, I can hear a little bit of echo. No, now it's good. So, good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me. I'm sorry I can't be with you in person in Moscow, but I'll do my best to convey a slightly broader context about attribution in the cyber context via technology. What I'll do in this brief session is I will give you an overview of the attribution framework, both in international law as well as in international relations, and I'll try to give an interstate context to the more technical attribution discussions that we've been having thus far. When we talk about cyber attribution in the interstate context, then the discussions almost always tend to center on the issue of evidence. And we, to an extent, also have witnessed this today in the 40 minutes that we've spent together. And usually the evidentiary questions that are always almost instantly being asked are, how can we prove that a malicious cyber operation is attributable to a state? Which evidence do we need? And how much evidence do we need in order to attribute the malicious cyber activity to a foreign state? And also in international law, the evidentiary question looms large. So what I'll do is I'll try to break down the evidentiary, the attribution analysis in international law to you. Now, before actually in international law we get to the evidentiary question, we have to address a prior issue. And that prior issue asks the question, whose cyber operations do we treat in law as those of the state? Which entities, which individuals must be engaging in those cyber operations for us to consider those cyber operations to be those of a sovereign state? Or to put it yet another way, which entities or individuals can be said to be representing the state, to be acting on behalf of the state? In law, this question that I just asked is the question of the applicable legal standard. And we first need to know which legal standard we are applying in a given scenario before we can turn to the evidentiary question, before we can talk about the proof that is required in order to establish that the legal standard has been met. In international law, there are several rules for attribution. I will only deal with the two that are the most important ones in the cyber context. And the first one, the main rule, says that whenever we have formal de jure state entities that engage in cyber activities, then as a matter of law, we can say that the state is acting. Okay. In other words, the cyber activity, the cyber operation is attributable to the state as a matter of law. Those entities in law are called state organs. So whenever the FSB engages in cyber activities, whenever the US National Security Agency engages in cyber activities, whenever the Chinese People's Liberation Army does so, we attribute those cyber operations to the respective states because all of those entities are qualify as state organs. So the legal term here is state organ. Whenever a state organ engages in cyber activities, we can say we have attribution to the state. All countries in the world agree with this premise, all courts, all scholars, so there is no controversy regarding this issue. The more complicated issue and the more controversial issue in law is what about non-state actors? And we know that this question looms large in the cyber context. So when can we say when the Internet Research Agency, for example, engages in cyber operations, that the IRA's cyber operations are attributable to Russia? When can we say that the actions of cyber criminals or lone hackers or terrorist organizations or organized armed groups, you name it, whichever non-state actor we have, when can we say that the non-state actor's cyber operations are attributable to a state? The answer here, as a matter of law, is that the state, and there are three different terms, three different standards, whenever the state is instructing the non-state actor, directing the non-state actor, or when the state is in effective control over the non-state actor. So all of those three standards are relatively high standards. They apply in limited circumstances, but it is again only when we have instructions, direction, or control that we can say the state has, the state itself has engaged in the cyber operations through the use of a proxy. So those are the legal standards that are most important in the cyber context. And now that we know what they are, and now that we know which standard we're applying in a cyber incident scenario, can we turn to the issue of evidence? And in relation to evidence, there actually are two separate issues as well. The first is how to establish that the legal standard has been met. Which information, which facts do we take into account? Much of our discussion has focused on this issue. The answer here is we take into account all relevant facts. If we have technical evidence available, IP addresses, linguistic information, forensics, malware analysis, you all mentioned those, then of course those facts, this information qualifies. But, and this is important, it is not only technical information that is and should be taken into account when making attribution determinations. And all sorts of other evidentiary information is taken into account and should be taken into account. What is this other type of information? It is covert intelligence, human intelligence, signals intelligence. It is open source intelligence. It is reports by private companies like Group ID, like Kaspersky. So in principle, all of those sources of information work. There may be limitations depending on the specific context of the attribution determination. But again, in principle, yes, technical evidence works, but so too does other types of evidence. And then the last question, the second question in the evidentiary analysis is how much proof is required? Do we need 100% proof? Do we need absolute certainty in order to attribute cyber activities to foreign states? Is it somewhere lower than that? Is it a beyond a reasonable doubt standard? I suppose most of you have heard this term because many domestic criminal legal systems use this test, beyond a reasonable doubt. Is this the standard that applies also in the interstate context? Or is it a high likelihood that suffices? When a state knows with a high likelihood, with a high degree of certainty that the cyber operation is attributable to another state, that is good enough. Okay. So that's the big question. Unfortunately, there is no single answer that applies across the board. What this means is that I can't tell you that you always need proof beyond a reasonable doubt in order to attribute cyber operations, whether it's WannaCry, whether it's NotPetya, whether it is SolarWinds to another state. And instead, the evidentiary requirements will be different depending on the context in which the attribution decision is being made. I'll give you a quick hypothetical just to illustrate this point. Let's say Estonia identifies a cyber attack against its electrical grid. There is no power here in Tallinn. It is winter and some people die. The Estonian security services are relatively certain, so not 100%, but relatively certain that the cyber attack was carried out by an organized cybercrime group that was instructed to conduct the attack by country X. So country X instructed a cybercrime group to engage in the cyber attack against Estonia. So how much certainty does Estonia need in order to say country X engaged in this cyber attack? Now, here the answer depends on what Estonia wants to do. If Estonia wants to engage in collective self-defense using military force with its NATO allies against country X, then there is nothing prohibiting Estonia to do so as a matter of international law, even though the level of certainty is pretty high, but not absolute. But here, Estonia would carry a degree of legal risk. What is the legal risk? The risk is that should it later turn out that country X was not behind the cyber operation, country X did not instruct the organized crime group to engage in the attack, and the organized crime group did so on its own initiative, then Estonia will have violated international law against country X. So Estonia will bear responsibility. The situation is different if Estonia wanted to sue country X before an international court. Let's say the International Court of Justice in The Hague. There, the court itself will say what the evidentiary rules are, For example, the International Court of Justice would in all likelihood say Estonia, as the applicant state, will need to present clear and convincing evidence. Clear and convincing, it's not 100% certainty, but the case needs to be made clearly and convincingly. And then finally, this is the type of attribution that we have witnessed most to date. It is public accusations. How much evidence would Estonia need in order to publicly accuse country X of having cyber attacked Estonia? Now, public accusations, they're a phenomenon of international relations. So here we're, strictly speaking, moving out of the realm of international law. We're not talking about self-defense. We're not talking about litigation. We're talking about one country's head of state or an ambassador accusing another state for having engaged in malicious cyber activities. Here, again, the analysis is still a two-step analysis. And the first question is, what is the standard for saying, what is the rule to be able to say that the operation is attributable to country X? Do we still work with organs and instruction and direction and control over non-state actors? The answer is there is no formal rule for such diplomatic engagement, but it is likely that the legal standards that I had on the previous slide will still apply. So if the victim state, if Estonia believes that country X was behind the operation because it instructed the non-state actors, then Estonia has applied the legal standard, and therefore it is justifiable to say publicly that country X was behind that attack against the electrical grid. There is a bit of uncertainty here. One situation is in which Estonia concludes that country X did not instruct the cybercrime group, but rather encouraged the cybercrime group. So let's say Estonia determines that country X had said something along the lines of, it would be really nice if the Estonian electrical grid was targeted via cyber means. In law, we couldn't say that the cyber operation is attributable to country X, but could it be attributed as a matter of international relations? Here we don't have a clear answer. Probably the accusation, if it was made by Estonia, would say something like, we condemn country X for its involvement in the cyber attack. So this is the first question in the international relations attribution analysis. The last question, again, is about evidence. How much evidence is required for a country to publicly accuse another state for having engaged in malicious cyber operations? And here, again, there is no formal rule. Courts have formal rules, unilateral self-help measures like self-defense. There we have formal rules. But in this diplomatic engagement, we don't have formal rules. And this is also illustrated by the various public accusations that have been made. Russia, of course, has often been on the receiving end of those public accusations. And you can see on the slide how the level of certainty on the part of the accusing state has differed. Sometimes the accusing state has been confident. Sometimes the accusing state has said it is likely that, in the last case, Russia was behind the SolarWinds hack. So there is no formal rule, and states effectively are free to make their public accusations whenever they feel that this is justified. The very last issue I'll touch upon, which relates to public accusations, is, does evidence have to be provided? When a state is making a public accusation, is it required to make the evidence upon which the determination was made public? The answer to this question is there is no requirement. So there is no obligation to publicize the evidence, but the international community has agreed in the United Nations that states should substantiate their claims. And what this means is that states should provide evidence that that the state that they are accusing was behind the cyber operation. Of course, no state is going to make all of the evidence available because often it will be classified, but at least some evidence should be provided. And I'll finish with that for now.
Большое спасибо, Лиз. Интересная точка
зрения. Thank you very much, Liz.
Она, наверное, присуща многим юристам.
Thank you for giving us this overview. It's a pity that there aren't any precise rules, strict rules, and every country. Every country is governed by their domestic legal standards and their practice. And I want to ask now Igor Zalewski from Rostelecom Solar. How often do your customers require attribution? Are they asking you to attribute the attack, or everything that the customers are interested in is to stop the attack and minimize the damage? Well, it depends. It depends on the customer, on the organization, and it also depends on the implications of the attack. If it's not a very big company, usually a mid-sized company would say, can you find this criminal by the IP? Can you send me the link to the account in the social media of this person? Well, then we have to explain to this customer that, well, it's a bit more complicated, and we try to stay away from such cases if it's not something large scale, if it's not something like those big hijacking of ATMs or financial systems where damages amount to millions, or the resources that can be spent on finding the person in the social media cannot be comparable with the damage. So it's all about proportionality. Sometimes the customers want to know who organized the attack in order to understand why they became the victim. By understanding the enemy, so to say, the company wants to understand itself better. They want to understand how they managed to attract the attention of the criminals. But it doesn't happen very often. But yeah, I guess the first thing that all customers want is to minimize damages, really, or to protect themselves from future attacks. Okay, Sergey, when, again, going back to what Igor said and Liz said, in case of a local crime, probably it's a simpler case. You have 3 experts, and if the experts coincide in, pointing a finger to a particular entity, then the court will be able to pass the judgment. But what about international investigations that are ran by Interpol or Europol, like the Spanish Katana, for instance? How were the cyber criminals found? Were all of them captured? I don't know. What's the story? Well, just because it's an international crime, things are not much different from a domestic investigation. You have to provide evidence. Like you have a victim, say, all Russian hackers in Taiwan who were stealing money from the ATMs. It's the same. It's absolutely the same. There are experts. They are, I don't know, we've got those bank clerks. They are in Taiwan, they're Chinese, and they give evidence to the Taiwan police. The Taiwan police do their investigation, and they find a link with France. Okay, but they cannot talk directly to France. They write to Singapore, to the Interpol Bureau, and they're asking the Interpol Bureau to facilitate the receipt of some artifacts from France. So it's really not a problem to investigate an international crime. Geopolitics interfering in the process? Which process? One person picking up the phone and calling another person? Can we have the logs from this IP server, please? What kind of geopolitics are we talking about? And all these international groups, like the Spanish case, for instance, this is how all these intelligence teams, those investigator teams are set up. And that's how they operate. And then there are other options. Well, extradition, for instance. Can you extradite that person? And secondly, okay, keep that person for yourselves. We don't have a prison to put that person in. Can you keep that guy and put him or her into prison at your place? Yeah, sure. And then the prosecutors start talking to each other between the countries, and they agree what to do with the criminals. So it's really not a problem to investigate an international crime and to prosecute an international crime and to bring the criminals to justice regardless of where they are. No, this is quite interesting. Speaking about mass media, yeah, again, judging by what we read in the mass media, for instance, there is this opinion that you have a hacker group and you have a hacker in the Ukraine, for instance. There is this opinion that it would be next to impossible for us to get the evidence from the Ukrainian police because there are tensions between Russia and the Ukraine. They will not respond to requests. Well, yeah, sometimes countries do not respond to other countries' requests, but it's not important really. When a request goes to another country and they're left without an answer, or you are receiving answers like, well, we're on our lunch break, we'll get back to you later. Okay, you don't have data from this particular country, but it's not the only country in the world. It's like you have a map and you have only one country on it. It's not so. We know it's not. Okay, it will be a one white spot on your map. You will not be able to retrieve data from that particular country, but the criminal will be passing the border sooner or later, or the criminal will commit crimes in other countries as well. There is still the Interpol, there are still other channels to get the information. Okay, so you're saying that it's not a problem. We don't have a problem. The problem is that some politicians speak their mind. Well, yes, the private opinion. The experts, if you involve experts, all experts should arrive at the same conclusion. If there is some doubt, then the lawyers for the defense will definitely make use of those doubts, and that's why the experts, if you ask an expert, is it possible that not this person stole the money from the ATM? Well, maybe him, maybe not him. An expert will give you an answer to the question, is there evidence, are there signs that such and such person, such and such code was used to perform the crime? Yes, there are the signs. Or are there signs that such and such entities or persons are behind this attack? The experts will say, yeah, there are signs, or there are no signs. Signs, it's a matter of signs, and the signs should be the same. They should coincide between the experts. If there is doubt, if someone doubts, then doubt, as we know in court, is interpreted in favor of the accused. Liz, I have a question to you. As a follow-up to what Sergei was saying, if you listen now to all the big shots in Western Europe, in the United States, if you read the reports of many companies, foreign companies, that conduct investigations in the field of security and incidents, they write and they say that it's likely, it's possible that the attack is organized by such and such states, because no one else could have, and that's why we believe that the likelihood is that it was this country X, and that's why Sergei is saying that it's difficult to collect evidence via Europol or the Interpol. Well, it's not a problem, rather. It's not a problem to get the evidence. Then why? Why do we hear those unsubstantiated accusations? Why do top officials fail to provide any evidence, but they are free to speak their mind? Why no one is taking countries to courts? They don't go to the International Court of Justice, for instance, and instead everything ends up in those public statements.
Yeah, apologies for the delay because I'm listening to the interpretation. Yes, so that's a good question. First of all, of course, private companies, they are free to issue their analysis. They are free to say that it is likely that a particular actor was behind the operation. There is, again, nothing prohibiting them from doing so. But when they come out with such public analysis, of course, they realize that if they get it wrong, they will carry the risk of losing business, of bearing reputational costs. So it's always a balancing act on the part of those companies, I'm sure. And the same is true for states. Why don't states publish evidence? I've never been a part of a government's decision-making process in publicly accusing another state, but I suspect that, in great part, they don't release the evidence because it is classified and they don't want to reveal their intelligence sources. We have seen on a couple of occasions countries trying to substantiate their claims with technical evidence, but again, it's unrealistic to hope that a state will make a full case with all the facts publicly, because again, this information is classified. They do not want to reveal their intelligence capabilities and sources. Your last question is the most interesting one for me. Why are we not seeing states have those cyber incidents litigated before an international court, such as the International Court of Justice? I personally would love to see this happening. Okay. It would be an appropriate course of action because the International Court of Justice is there to hear interstate disputes. It is a forum of peaceful settlement of disputes. It is definitely de-escalatory and not escalatory in the vast majority of cases. It is a much better option of dispute settlement than, for example, engaging in sanctions or even more robust unilateral responses. So I would love to see this happen. Is it likely that it will happen? Well, it's probably a matter of time that it will happen, but is it likely that we'll see, the United States and Russia appear before the International Court of Justice over a cyber incident? In today's world, unfortunately not. And the reason is that for the International Court of Justice to have a jurisdiction over such a case, both parties must agree. Both parties must consent. And even though many of us probably would like to see the United States and Russia or the United Kingdom and North Korea consent to the ICJ's, to the International Court of Justice's jurisdiction, we have to be realistic. It's very, very unlikely. But it would be, in my view, the ideal course of action.
Спасибо. Александр.
Thank you, Alexander. Thank you, Liz and Alexander. I have a question to you. In the context of this transboundary international investigation, which body can become this trusted judge that will be collecting evidence from different parties? And these parties may not necessarily be allies geopolitically, so that the parties would trust the verdict, the sentence, or the resolution of such a judge, such an arbitrator. Can it be the Interpol? Can the Interpol be also not just the investigator body, but a judging body in those conflicts? Is there such a structure today that anyone would be willing to trust? It's a difficult question. I don't think so. I don't know. I'm not sure that, say, the Russian law enforcement authorities would be willing, in all cases, to cooperate fully with the Interpol or anybody else. I think that sometimes non-official cooperation is more efficient than cooperation at the official level. So that's to say, for instance, Sergey from Kaspersky Labs would be requesting some information from their colleagues in another country. Probably they would be able to get it faster and simpler than if the same information would be requested via official channels. Well, take Rosada against WADA. Two countries met in Switzerland over Skype or however. Then there was a sentence. Or the Swiss Court of Arbitration. Why is this possible? Because there is an agreement between different parties to the case. Like in sports, countries and local associations agree that they will settle their disputes in Switzerland. Okay, fine, Switzerland. Or there is a river that flows across territories of several countries, and one country pollutes the river. The other country is damaged. Okay, so these countries can go to court, and they can compute the damages. In case of incidents, there are no such tribunals, there are no such courts. You can't go anywhere, really. Who can be the judge? Where are you coming to? The Hague? No, no one is going to go there. There is no such court. One thing that I know is that the Anglo-Saxon, say, community in the United Nations, they are trying to initiate the establishment of such a court, but until now they haven't succeeded. So one way today is to investigate the incidents and to collect information to be able to attribute the attack is the Interpol and the Europol, and there is no international tribunal, so the process, the litigation should take place in a country. It will be a domestic and national process, trial. Well, I guess the best that you can have today is capture financial cybercriminals, like in case of Taiwan or in Spain, when there is evidence. And evidence was collected because it was a local crime. And, well, basically what they did is a crime anywhere in every country of the world. So local courts would be interested in seeing these people, go into jail. Probably that's why those cases are successfully prosecuted. Well, hackers can be tried anywhere in any country just for not paying taxes. Even if it's not, if the charges are not related to cybercrime, hackers can still be charged with tax avoidance. So it looks like we do not have one official body to investigate cybercrimes or one official tribunal to try, because no country will ever admit that it stood behind the attack. This is what Lise was saying. Like, countries go to The Hague, they have to agree, both. They have to agree to hand the case over to the International Court of Justice. If the countries do not agree, there is no trial, period. Well, this is not very optimistic, is it? Well, there are technical investigations that end up in courts and in the restitution of damages. And then there is the public domain, where every person has the right to the private opinion. Are these things related? No. Right now, they are not related. Okay, Igor, I have a question to you then on technical attribution. If we are not discussing who instigated a crime, whether it was a state or a government actor, but if we only want to attribute a crime to a particular hacker group, to a particular criminal, is it easier? Is this attribution easier? Have you ever had cases like this? Or again, no one is interested in this kind of attribution apart from law enforcement authorities who will be able to claim the investigation, the successful investigation to themselves. Well, I think that information security experts are the ones who are most interested in those investigations. It's not even the law enforcement authorities. It's complicated, as you know. There are Russian angry hackers, but there is another region in the world. If you read the various reports, about 70% of all public reports, one way or another, mention groups that are attributed to China. It's a fact of life. Even if you review the publications, I don't know, of the Russian mass media, even if you review the publications or the reports of Russian companies, you will find there references to Chinese hackers. In the 21st century, in 2021, Microsoft wrote that the zero-day vulnerability was abused by the Chinese hackers. They started penetrating mail servers. And you can find information about as many as 12 different hacker groups. But do they really exist? Isn't it 2 or 3 units of some company or even a government service? I will impersonate this group today. Hey, I'll pose as this one out of 12 alleged Chinese groups. There is no single register. There is no way to trace or to link different groups together. There's no single mechanism or algorithm. I have the right to my personal opinion, right? So I see some Chinese symbols in this code. It must be the Chinese, and let's call this group XYZ. If someone tomorrow finds a similar Chinese character in the code, well, if those other people read my report, probably they'll be able to establish the link, but they can give yet another name to the very same group. Again, it's complete chaos. There is no consistency, there is no uniformity, there is no one single database. If you want to find out who is attacking you, you have to find someone's naming. You have to choose one name, adopt it, and then start with it, and then you pull the thread and investigate. And if you are lucky, you'll be able to connect this attack with another group and link them together. Okay, Alexander, a question to you. In percentage terms, out of all the incidents that you have to investigate, how often can you make an attribution? And after you've done all your forensic exercises, how often can you get from some group to a particular person, to a specific name? How often does it happen? Do you have the data? Do you have the statistics? Well, we don't have the statistics. I mean, not the official ones, but if I were to guess, I'd say we are capable of identifying more than 50% of different groups, I'd say. So we can make an attribution of an attack in about 50% of cases. And often you have to explain to the customers why is it important to attribute the attack to a criminal. And of course, if you yourself were under an attack, probably you would like to know the name of the person who launched this attack against you. Sometimes it takes not even days, it takes months, maybe even years. And Sergey will confirm that sometimes after 5 years from the attack, you go to court and present your evidence there. It takes years. You can't find that person quickly. Okay, for instance, in a week, 1,000 phishing websites emerge suddenly online with against a particular brand. And the brand will become worried. And this brand expects to stop the process quickly and find the abuser. Again, it is often possible to attribute an attack to a group or a person, but we do not always receive those requests. So you are saying that 50% of the attacks can be attributed to a group of criminals, and if the customer is willing and wants to pay and wants to wait, you will be able to, almost in every of those cases, to find the actual individual behind it with the help of LEAs? Well, yeah, it will take time, but yeah, if the customer is willing, yes, we can find the individuals. Oh, okay, fine. So initially we confirmed that it's difficult to attribute or to prove any geopolitical claims, but in the business world, like in business customers, it feels like evidence can be collected, and again, if there is a will, then criminals can be captured and prosecuted, right? Yes, yeah, exactly. Yes, yeah, I agree. Liz, I have a question to you. How do things stand in Europe? How often do companies want not only to find out the name, but are willing to wait and are willing to invest into an investigation?
So, to be honest, I don't know what the answer to that question is. I've never been a part of those deliberations either. So I guess in great part for a company, the decision will primarily be a business decision. You know, and if it makes sense from a business perspective to wait and to attribute a relatively old case, then I suppose that the company will go ahead and release their analysis and release their assessment. If you don't mind, I'd quickly just like to come back to the issue of courts, because we spent quite a bit of time discussing prosecution of cybercrime, discussing the litigation of interstate claims. And specifically with regard to interstate claims, an interesting point was made, that we don't have a specialized court for cyber incidents, and therefore, it's unrealistic to expect that they will ever get litigated. There are actually quite a few specialized courts for concrete areas of interstate interaction. You're right, there is no such court for cyber, but we do have, for example, war crimes tribunals for war crimes. We have the International Tribunal of the Law of the Sea for violations of the United Nations Law of the Sea Convention. So yes, there are separate specialized courts, but we don't have one for cyber. And you all probably know that Russia has been pushing for an organization that would specifically deal with attribution in the cyber context for quite a number of years. But it's an idea that many countries are not horribly fond of. But would it theoretically be an option for the interstate context? So the answer is yes. Will it ever materialize? Again, I don't know. But do we need a specialized court or an arbitral body or an attribution organization to ever do attribution of interstate cyber incidents? The answer here, I would say, is no, because we don't have specialized courts for photo incidents. We don't have specialized courts for environmental disputes in the vast majority of cases. And those cases do get litigated before a general court like the International Court of Justice. So it's theoretically possible, but again, it boils down to the agreement of the parties concerned that they want this to happen. And this leads me to the last point that I briefly wanted to comment on, which is how could we make it compulsory for states to have to appear before a court or tribunal, whichever court it may be, a cyber court in the future or a general court? Well, unfortunately here, the answer again is we need the consent of the states concerned. So even though the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea may have compulsory jurisdiction, it got the compulsory jurisdiction right from the underlying consent of states. So unfortunately, it still boils down to sovereign states having to agree among themselves that they agree to this, because clearly one state cannot impose its will on another, with the exception of the Security Council, but that's a non-starter too.
Спасибо. Спасибо, Лиз. Сергей, ты хотел добавить по поводу практики европейской?
Заказчиков в Европе. Просто я как...
Well, as an expert, I am a digital forensics expert, and I travel in Europe for on those assignments. Of course, there was no travel in 2020, but I traveled quite extensively in 2019. For instance, you arrive at the site because you were called because of an incident. There is a template. You have to fill out the computers that were damaged, the IP addresses. Then the customers pay you for your services. And people started using this template, and all the customers started insisting on adding something to the template. Everybody, what is it? Personal data, GDPR extracted information. The last thing that was changed in the template, in the incident response template, is leakages of personal data pursuant to GDPR. That's all customers insisted on including that into this template. But attribution is not there. It was never there, and it's still not there. No one is insisting on including attribution into the template. Do you have questions from the audience? We have 3 minutes left. Let's ask a question to Liz, and then, if time permits, we will have another question. Liz, as an expert on international law, a question to you. The government today is perhaps the only actor that is capable of executing transboundary attacks and use force across borders.
So this is the question about hackback.
And what about hackback and the private sector? Is it okay if companies hack back?
Okay, again, apologies for the delay. I was waiting for the interpretation. Is it okay if companies hack back? It's a very interesting question. So as a matter of international law, so country A, country B, interstate relations, and I realize we're pressed for time. The short answer is, it is kind of okay. In other words, international law does not prohibit companies from hacking back. However, I'm pretty sure that in many countries, it is the domestic criminal law that prohibits private sector hackbacks. And therefore, if such laws are in place, obviously the companies will risk criminal liability, both within their own state as well as the state in which the hackback occurs. So international law is I would say, is agnostic. We could come up with creative legal arguments for finding international legal responsibility for private sector hackbacks, but it's really domestic criminal law that is relevant here.
Okay, так, хорошо. Тогда последний вопрос. В каких...
Okay, we have time for one more question. The domain name registration system, does it need any improvements? What are the services that should be developed to help information security experts in their work? Igor, let's start with you. Well, to tell you the truth, GDPR tightened the screws, and when, say, when experts wanted to identify the perpetrators, we needed information from who is, and we used it in the past, who registered when, etc. But now, most of the services, in accordance with GDPR, are hiding this information. So sometimes now it's more difficult to find this data. GDPR, for instance, made our lives as experts of information security harder. But how can we make it better than terminate GDPR or what? No. Keep GDPR, just like the law on personal data. GDPR also protects us. Privacy must be protected. Yeah, it's no one argues with that. It's just that often the experts do not need to know the name. When the Russian WHOIS was opened, for instance, for us that is enough. If you can hash the name, a hash is enough. If you want, you can conceal your data somehow. If you don't want to help others, to find out your name through brute force. But well, add something else. Add .org, .net, whatever. Add more data into this hash. But anyway, for us, hashes is enough, and privacy will be maintained. Now, this is hashing is for personal data is a simple and powerful tool. I agree. Okay, colleagues, let's summarize the session. I want you to thank Liz and Alexander and Igor and Sergey. We did our best to paint the landscape of the current attribution capabilities. It looks like today it is possible to attribute hacker groups with a high degree of accuracy and certainty. And there are various technical means that enable us to reliably say that a certain hacker or criminal group is behind an attack. Sometimes we'll even see that 2 or 3 different groups are actually one group, but as we are building links and graphs between these attributes, we'll be able to have those insights as well. And if the customers are willing, if the organizations are interested in not only attributing the attack to a group, but if they want to identify the individuals, in many cases inside the states and often in the international arena, it is still possible to prosecute individuals. You can identify natural persons and you can bring them to justice. It's possible. The only problem that we have today with attribution is geopolitical incidents when officials of the government will speak their private opinion about who, in their opinion, is behind such and such incident, and unfortunately they often fail to provide any evidence. If there is indeed evidence, often it is not shared with the public because it's classified, because it's a secret. And unfortunately, there are no courts, specialized courts, that would be capable of trying those cases and bring the culpable persons to justice. In coming years, we do not expect many changes in this status quo. The group of government experts of the United Nations, if you remember their story, they studied the international, or they tried to research and define the rules of behavior, international behavior online, and the rules of cyber security. they've been around since, 1998, and still there is no definition, there is no solution. Some say that we should be using cybersecurity, others are saying, no, it's not cybersecurity, it's information security. We, at the moment, are not capable of reaching a consensus on that, and that's why we have these problems with attribution as well. Locally, it's possible. Globally, it's a challenge. I wanted to thank everyone who participated in the discussion, who contributed to the discussion and sent their questions. Very well, thank you very much. We have prepared these souvenirs for all the panelists. We celebrated the 10th anniversary of the .rf domain, and we manufactured these pins. These are for you to keep. And dear friends, we are going to have a quick break. Please be back at 11:40 Moscow time on our last session of the forum. The discussion session will start in a few minutes. Session 7, user agreements with internet platforms, will begin at 11:40. Thank you.